salvation price.
Words of encouragement and set out then upon that's no consolation. That's the big part.
We're going to start in just a few minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not even a member of that department. So that was what I do.
Yeah, really, everything remote.
Yeah, I will fight my way out.
That's hard to do.
Okay, bonsoir tout le monde. Hi everyone. I'm just going to say a few words in French, and then the rest of the presentation is going to be in English. Mais je vais faire le mieux en français. Si jamais vous avez des interventions pendant la présentation ou après, pour ceux qui sont avec nous sur Zoom, là, Okay, all right, thanks. So for those that are with us on Zoom, pour ceux qui sont avec nous sur Zoom, vous pouvez nous écrire sur le chat si vous avez des questions tout au long de la présentation, puis moi, ça va me faire plaisir de traduire si jamais c'est en français au besoin. Je me présente, je m'appelle Lina Bensaidan, je serai votre animatrice ce soir. Merci beaucoup d'être ici, tout d'abord, à ce panel organisé par la Semaine de sensibilisation musulmane, qui est une initiative citoyenne qui vise à encourager le vivre ensemble dans un temps où est-ce qu'on a vraiment besoin. Alors, avant de commencer officiellement, so before officially starting the presentation, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, So, as we gather, it is important that each and every one of us respectfully acknowledges and recognizes the ancestral, treaty, and unceded territories of all the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples that call our respective lands home. We acknowledge the unique and sacred relationship that Indigenous peoples have with the land, water, and all living creatures. We're very lucky and grateful to be here. So it is my pleasure to present our first guest tonight, member of the National Assembly, Jennifer Macaron, member of the Quebec Liberal Party. So I'll invite you over for a few words.
So good evening, everyone. I am Jennifer Macaron. I am the outgoing MNA for West Mount St. Louis and candidate for the Liberal Party of Quebec in the same riding. And it really is a pleasure for me to be here with all of you this evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. One of the reasons why I was very glad to attend and be with you here tonight is because I believe that events such as this, organized by Muslim Awareness Week and celebrating the diversity of our province and who we are, it means that we need to celebrate. We need to talk more about it. We need to have more events such as this so that our community becomes more aware of who we are and what we represent, because we are vast, we are diverse, and we are represented by multiple communities. I do believe that our province is strongest when we uphold the equality of all of our people. And that's something that I think that I'm sure everyone who participates in events like this is a value that we share. And that includes women, that includes language, that includes race, that includes religious diversity. It's also particularly essential that we attend and participate in events such as the one that's organized tonight, as we face a lot of policies that are happening in the National Assembly that limit basic rights of many of our Quebec citizens. And I think that we all agree that it's essential that each voice in our community is heard. Pensons juste cette semaine à notre Premier ministre ainsi que notre ministre de l'Immigration qui a tenu quand même des propos aberrants en ce qui concerne l'immigration et la diversité culturelle et religieuse qui rime avec le suicide, avec la violence. Et juste anecdote, des mots forts, dangereux et négatifs et inacceptables. Honestly, what I see from immigration in our cultural communities is not a you. I see an us that's strong, an us that's diverse, an us that has a place and a belonging in a strong Canada, a strong Quebec within a united Canada, a prosperous society that's open to all of our communities. And it's by way of increasing our opportunities that we listen to our multicultural communities, that we build bridges to overcome fear, to overcome hate, to overcome the challenges that we face and that we see, especially right now in our government and in our politics. L'inclusion et le respect des droits et des libertés des personnes de toute origine est d'autant plus nécessaire que le Québec compte sur tous les talents pour bâtir un avenir qui est dynamique, une économie qui va faire rayonner le Québec à travers le Canada et à l'international. It's essential that we work to strengthen our openness and our diversity because it's what unites us. And most of you who are following politics know that it's something that the Liberal Party believes in. We voted against Bill 21. We voted against Bill 96. We have continued to fight for the rights of our minority communities, whether that's linguistic or religious. These are values that are important to us, and we will continue the fight even after October 3rd. Alors, je compte sur vous, évidemment, pour voter en grand nombre, parce que ce qu'on souhaite, c'est envoyer un message à M. Legault que nous sommes tous et toutes des Québécois et Québécoises à part entière, et de mettre fin à la politique de division. It's time to put an end to the politics of division. It really is. So I'm sincerely hoping that people will go and make their voices heard and participate in our democratic society. We have a right to vote. I believe we have an obligation to express ourselves. And I hope that everybody will take advantage of that opportunity, because we know that it's not the same in other places, and it's a privilege that we have here in Canada. So thank you very much for your time. I'm looking forward to the presentation, and I'll be sticking around if anybody wants to chat. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I will now be inviting over Brian Bronfman for a few words as well.
Bonsoir. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Concordia University for hosting this event, as well as the good people at Muslim Awareness Week and the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. As president of an organization that uses collaboration as the backbone for all of its work, I really appreciate the power and impact of initiatives such as this one, which unite multiple partners around an important theme. The Peace Network for Social Harmony is made up of 24 members from the worlds of philanthropy and business, along with 24 individuals who are friends of the network, multiple supporters such as the Dim Family Foundation for Peace Days, and dozens of stakeholders who partner with us in our various activities through our central themes, which are diversity and inclusion, violence prevention, and peace promotion. We deeply value the contribution both to our work and to the well-being of society as a whole made by our partners on the ground, including the organizers of tonight's event. Since its creation in 2009, the Peace Network has placed great emphasis on diversity, inclusion, equity, social justice, and interculturalism, with our current contribution reaching just a whole other level with this year's Forum on Diversity and Inclusion that took place in April over 2 days at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. The forum was an incredible success with inspiring presentations, thoughtful panels, and impactful facilitated dialogue sessions for the over 100 organizations that were present. And the forum was just the first step in a larger project to use collaboration as a means of increasing every stakeholder's impact and efficiency within the diversity and inclusion field. So if you're interested in that, you could speak with me later. Meanwhile, Peace Days is an annual initiative that we coordinate in which we provide a platform and a spotlight for peace-related activities taking place in and around Montreal from the September 21st International Day of Peace to the October 2nd International Day for Nonviolence. Our network is proud of this 8th edition of Peace Days, which has been offering 45 activities organized by over 50 implementing partners over these 12 days. Each year, Peace Days has a specific theme, and this year's theme is Take Action for Equality, End Racism, Build Peace. And that, of course, is very much in keeping with tonight's discussion. The Peace Days 2022 theme is also a nod to the forum and is a call to action. Our society won't truly live in peace until we're fully committed to equity and we put an end to racism and discrimination. There are so many obstacles out there right now in Quebec and beyond that are dividing us. Those include distrust and antagonism based on our skin tone, on where we come from, on who we love, on what language we speak, on how long we've been here, on what religion we speak, and also most superficially, I'd say, in both the literal and figurative sense of the word, what we wear. So instead of that, we need to come together, as we are doing tonight, to build bridges of understanding, to commit to tolerance and respect, and to resolve to ensure a better future for the next generation, and better yet, for the 7 generations to come. Even after tonight, there are wonderful activities that remain on the Peace Days schedule, so you can see them at thepeacedays.com. So s'il vous plaît, visitez Journée de la Paix, journée avec un S, journéedelapaix.com pour en savoir plus, ainsi que le réseau paix.ca afin de mieux connaître le travail du réseau pour la paix et l'harmonie sociale. So you can also learn about the Peace Network by visiting thepeacenetwork.ca. I'm also going to mention for the people here, if you're so inspired or so interested, I brought a number of these t-shirts. This last minute decision I thought I'd offer since it's dress codes tonight. Well, you could dress yourself up in this t-shirt, which has the peace symbol, and it says, Je suis responsable, it's on me, because it's on all of us to create a more peaceful world. So thank you, merci, miigwech, shalom, salam, and enjoy your day.
Thank you very much, Brian. I love that shirt. It is great. So I will
25 of them sitting outside.
Oh, okay, good. That's good to know. It's noted. I will now leave the floor to Chairman Nelson, who will start the panel and present will be the moderator actually for tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Jennifer and Brian, for those inspiring words to start this event. I am the chair of the Department of Classics, Modern Languages and Linguistics at Concordia. Our interest in this event runs in various directions. Before I start, I'd like to thank Sama Elibiadi for inviting me to help organize and participate in this event. CMLL has a minor program in Arabic Studies, so that is one of the interests that I have. Another interest that I have is early modern Spain. My class here on Don Quixote and the Age of Disinformation is also an important part of tonight. You may not know, but early modern Spain was home to the descendants of Muslims who were called the Moniscos, who arrived, their ancestors arrived in Spain in the year 711. And they stayed in Spain for 900 years until they were finally expelled between 1609 and 1613. Miguel De Cervantes, who I'm going to speak about later, I won't say a lot now, but he lived and wrote during this time, and his writings about what he witnessed treated the Moorish and Morisco other with great humanity, great respect, and as you will see, provide some tools for us today to work through the media-saturated reality that we inhabit. And it just happens to be a stroke of luck. You can say it's good or bad that our Minister of Immigration here in Quebec has now expressed a lot of disinformation, which my class will be digesting through Cervantes. But we're going to start tonight's talk with Adnan Husain. I'm just going to read his bio here from my phone if I can get it up. He's a professor at Queen's University. He's the director of the School of Religion. He's associate professor of the Medieval Mediterranean and Islamic World in the Department of History. He's also the director of the Muslim Society's Global Perspectives Project at Queen's. He studies and teaches about the shared histories, religious cultures, and cross-cultural relations among Christians, Muslims, and Jews in the medieval period, as well as their legacies on the present. He hosts 2 podcasts, he offers a free online course, and he's an avid fan of the Arsenal Football Club. I guess you have my sympathies as a Minnesota Vikings fan. His talk is titled Clothes Make the Man, and he's going to talk about appearance and identity in the multicultural Mediterranean world.
Thanks so much, Brad, for hosting here at Concordia, for the invitation, the warm introduction, and also to Lena, Jennifer, and Brian for attending, for their remarks. Very apropos Ridolfo, and to all the sponsoring groups for their support, and especially to Sister Sama Libyari for all of the hard work arranging and organizing and bringing us together. We really appreciate it. I have to be brief because we want to get to discussion, but there's so much to cover. My task was actually to provide the historical context of the pre-modern Mediterranean so that we could understand what's happening in Spain at the time of the Moniscos in the early modern period. Sorry, I forgot about that. I'd like to simply introduce a few crucial points and rehearse some history about the place of clothing and appearance in establishing social and group identities in the pre-modern Mediterranean world. I also want to touch upon the transformations in late medieval and early modern Spain, indeed more broadly in Europe as a whole, perhaps, of what we could call the Mediterranean pattern for inclusion and differentiation of communities and groups in the multicultural and multi-religious but hierarchical medieval societies before the emergence of racial categories in the modern sense that divides societies and the world to a great extent, that to the extent that W.E.B. Du Bois, the famous 19th and 20th century Black American sociologist, thinker, activist, dissident, predicted in a remark where he declared that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, the relation of the darker to the lighter races of men in Asia and Africa, in America and the islands of the sea. Now, if that was the case for the 20th century, in the pre-modern world, ethno-religious identity was far more significant as a basis of social arrangement and of social status. We could even say that the problem of the 12th century, and maybe to some extent the 21st, our own, is a culture line, a religious culture line, to be more precise. Oh, it is. It is. Okay. Great. All right. How was this problem of religious and cultural difference to be made visible? Through appearance. This is how it was recognized. It wasn't some abstract kind of idea of what people's beliefs were. It was how you could identify them and how people expressed their identity through their appearance. Principally, things like headgear, what hat you wore. This was a very differentiating kind of symbol, really. Grooming, how you wore your hair, what kind of facial hair you had, if you had any, and above all, clothing. Distinctive forms of dress indicated tribal or ethnic group affiliation and membership or status. There was differentiation within groups, of course, that marked status, position, or profession. So long robes and turbans of the Muslim religious scholars, the red hats of the College of Cardinals, the habits of monks and nuns, the wool cloaks of the Sufi mystics. These were all markers of difference, how you represented yourself and how you were recognized. And of course there was a great distinction between male and female in modes of dress, and this was all indicated. So social group identity was expressed and recognized through visible signs. All of these signs are not what we would think of as racial features or racial signs. In fact, those were not what was dominant. It was things like what you wore, how you wore your hair. Now, we can, of course, understand some elements of this today because, a banker and a butcher may dress rather differently when they're in their professional environment. Fashion often expresses cultural orientations or affiliations. My son, I forced him into this. He's now an Arsenal fan. He wears an Arsenal football jersey to school almost every day. It's his uniform. You can't get him to change to wear something more formal. It has to be an Arsenal jersey. He's a member of that tribe. That's how he affiliates. For us, however, these are often choices about how we want to dress and how we want to express ourselves publicly to others. In other contexts, in the past, which is what we'll be talking about, and even, of course, as we know, in the present, political decisions have removed choices by requiring or forbidding certain forms of dress, whether to defend narrow ideas of religious observance, as we're seeing being enforced in Iran right now, or equally bigoted ideas and authoritarian ideas of laïcité that prevent you from dressing as you wish. Now, complicating such identities or sort of concerns about ethnic and social identities, social class or gender distinctions in the pre-modern world was religious identity. In late antiquity, Nicene Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire through the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE. Monotheistic religion joined empire to form what I call confessional empires or confessional polities and societies. That is, ones where there was a dominant official religion that stood in a hierarchical position vis-a-vis all other faiths. And it created many different consequences that could and did flow from such a position. Did you tolerate the existence of other religious communities? If so, how? In what terms? When the Arab Muslims conquered the Persian Sasanian Empire that was a majority Zoroastrians as well as many other religions, and much of the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire, at least the parts that are in what is today's North Africa and Middle East, with its diverse groups of Christian sects, of Jews, and many other religious communities, a similar question arose over how to rule and manage such diverse and heterogeneous societies. What was going to be the approach or the attitude to non-Muslim subjects now of Muslim political rule? Well, I just showed these. These are about the modern diversity of the Middle East, religiously and ethnically, and I just showed them to point out how incredibly diverse even the modern Middle East is. It was much more so in the pre-modern period. And my point here is, of course, that despite the ravages of war in the modern period, expulsions, conflict, nationalism, truly the bane of a diverse society's existence, and economic deprivation that have led to waves of migration and refugees, often of ethnic or religious minorities, it is still a very diverse place. Imagine how incredibly diverse and cosmopolitan the Eastern Mediterranean was in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. Now, initially, the policy of the Arab Muslim conquerors was to avoid disrupting the subject population settled in cities and fertile agricultural lands by settling in separate garrison cantonments for the army at the edge of these settled zones. Places, I guess I should show a map again, places like Kufa in Iraq, Fustat, which later became part of Cairo in today's Egypt, or Kairouan in what is today Tunisia. The purpose of this policy of settlement in these garrison cantonments outside at the edge of the settled agricultural zones was to preserve the distinctive religious identity of the Arab Muslim ruling community from assimilation into the majoritarian culture and religions of the Christian Syrians or the Egyptian Copts or the Persian Zoroastrians. Conversion did start to happen, although it was not an objective and a practice to encourage it early on. It may come as a surprise to many Muslims that that wasn't the policy early on. But it was a requirement
for joining the politically and militarily dominant community. Though numerically small, to be a member of this class, you had to join this Arab Muslim elite. What did it mean in this early stage to convert to Islam? One case illustrates the complexities of appearance and the interplay between ethnic, cultural, and religious identity. And that is the case here of the new convert to Islam, Al-Afsin, Prince of Usrusana, which is an area in what is today Central Asia between the Oxus and Jaxartes rivers, the Sir and Amu Darya. There's a lot of context. It's a very interesting case, but there's a 9th century Muslim universalist historian, Al-Tabari, who tells us about the trial of Afshin, who was charged with leading or planning to lead a rebellion against the Abbasid Caliph of the time. Now his family were the princes and rulers of this area in Sogdia of Usrusana, and when the Arab Muslims conquered this area, they joined, basically, in order to keep and preserve their status as rulers of this area. They said, fine, we will join you, and we will become Muslims. Nonetheless, they seem to have kept some kinds of sympathies with other groups, and he was implicated in being involved in a political rebellion. The trial, however, focused very much on questions of religion. Was he actually a good Muslim? Now, what was interesting is what constituted a question in this case. He still had books that were Zoroastrian books. He had to explain all of these things. He allowed the pagan or idolatrous temple of their traditional religion to still continue to exist, even though certain proselytizers tried to shut it down. He intervened, and he ended up punishing those who had tried to close the temple of their traditional faith. He was asked about this. Why are you doing this if you're a good Muslim? And then they brought a Zoroastrian priest to give testimony against him. The Zoroastrian priest said this: one day, Al-Afsin said to me, "Truly I have given in to these people in everything I hated, even to the extent that because of them I have eaten oil and ridden camels and worn sandals." Okay? So what is it that he thought it meant to be a genuine Muslim? He represents it as assimilating to Arab tribal cultural customs. Is eating foods that he was not familiar with, that weren't his traditional Persian diet, cooked with this heavy oil, riding camels instead of a horse. He was a kind of landowner in the Persian tradition. He was used to wearing high boots, baggy trousers, and embroidered coats, but he had given all that up to join this new ruling elite to the extent that he was riding camels and, wearing sandals, and he's complaining about this. So for him, becoming a Muslim meant assimilating to Arabness in this early period. So there was an interplay between ethnic and religious identity. However, after 200 or 300 years, a mass Muslim society eventually grew out of this slow process of conversion, particularly in the cities, and the basis of social status and political hierarchy was organized around Muslim religious identity on a broader basis as the majoritarian and dominant millah, or religious community. Non-Muslims, in some respects like Jews in Byzantium, or even to some extent in the early medieval Latin West, continued to practice their religions, to follow their religious laws administered by their own religious authorities and leaders, possessed rights to life, property, and inclusion economically, but were considered social subordinates and excluded from wielding ultimate political and military power. Instead, they paid a special tax and were guaranteed safety and respect of these rights as protected peoples. This was basically a shared Mediterranean-wide pattern of inclusion. More or less the way in which society was organized all across North Africa, even to some extent in the early Middle Ages in Europe, and of course in Byzantium. In Islamic legal and administrative practices, this Mediterranean pattern was codified in an established framework in Islamic law that was symbolized by the so-called Pact of Omar, the name for an early Muslim caliph, enshrining the rights of non-Muslims within Muslim-governed society. But how to distinguish religious difference now that we have this issue and mark what was a subordinate status, though tolerated and protected in various ways? In some versions of the stipulations of this tradition, non-Muslims were to wear a distinguishing colored patch on their shoulders or distinctive headgear. Often it was a blue or a yellow turban, for example, and frequently a belt or sash called the zunnar. In the multi-religious society of Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, similar arrangements were established for Jews and Catholic Christians, even though Arabic became the language of courtly and intellectual culture. In response to the success of Castilian King Alfonso VI in capturing Toledo in 1086, the Andalusians sought aid from the Berber North African Almorabitun or Almoravids, whose conservative reformist Maliki interpretation of Islam sought to reinforce religious differentiation that was felt to have, become too mixed and unclear in the mixed society of Andalusia, and also to reinscribe the social subordination of non-Muslims, especially in public places like the market. One very conservative market inspector named Ibn Abdun reflected the need to police the boundaries of social communities in terms of dress. No day laborer, guardsman, Jew or Christian may be allowed to dress in the costume of people of position, of a jurist, or of a worthy man. They must have a distinguishing sign by which they are recognized to their shame. So this was an attempt to impose this kind of social hierarchy, and above all, it reflects this concern that you not have members of the non-religious community inhabiting positions or appearing to inhabit positions of authority over the dominant Muslim community. Now this might sound a little familiar if you're wondering why it is that teachers, policemen, judges are under Bill 21 not allowed to wear certain kinds of religious dress that might violate the sense of who is the norm and who is the dominant community. It's a very similar kind of concern that we see expressed here by a fairly bigoted 12th century medieval figure, market inspector. As the progress of the so-called Reconquista proceeded, especially after the defeat of a subsequent Berber dynasty, the Almowahidun or the Almohads in Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, by a combined crusading-style force organized by Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, vast numbers of Muslims now came under Latin Catholic rule. They were called mudejars and were often depicted as wearing a distinctive hairstyle, a distinctive haircut and darker features. This is from a 15th century book of Hours that represents Jesus being brought before Caiaphas, right? Because of his activities, and he's then going to be turned over for punishment to Pontius Pilate. So you have Jews and people who are clearly mudejars, retrojected back into a period where there were no Muslims, okay? Let's remember, this is before the coming of Islam, when Jesus was, tried and all of his activities. So this is sort of retrojecting the apparent enemies of Christ that are present in the 15th century when this depiction is being made and populated with Jews who are wearing distinctive headgear, okay, and distinctive clothing, and the Mudejar Muslims wearing a distinctive haircut and also being marked out. Now this conquest of Las Navas de Tolosa left only the Emirate of Granada as a Muslim-ruled polity on the Iberian Peninsula until its capture in 1492. Similar concerns to those I just talked about in Ibn Abdun's 12th century concerns about mixing in the marketplace of Sevilla framed the Catholic rulers' concerns and church figures about Spanish Muslims and Jews. In addition to Ibn Abdun's concerns over maintaining social distinctions and hierarchy through clothing, Catholic canonists added additional concerns about transgressing the boundaries for social and theological reasons in the important Lateran IV Universal Council of the Catholic Church under Pope Innocent III in 1215. It's a very interesting council because it was really one of the key reforming councils that established the basis for Catholic piety. It's what established confession as a universal requirement for Catholics at least once a year. It's the council that mandated that all Christian Catholics need to attend Mass at least once a year on Easter. Okay, these all are the provisions that really make, for some historians of the Church, Europe a really Christian society and culture, because now the expectation is that everyone will actually participate in the sacraments. It is also the council that was organized to plan the Fifth Crusade. Innocent III was very keen on this, so he brought together everyone. We need to reform our Christian society. We keep losing to the Muslims over and over again because of our sins. We need to reform and all become good Catholic Christians. And once we do that, then we can bring everyone together and organize a successful crusade this time, the fifth. It was as unsuccessful as the previous ones, but he definitely gave it the full attempt. But what else was this Lateran IV Council concerned with? At the end, there are several provisions that relate to the question of non-Christians in a newly reformed Christian society and the dangers and risks they pose, that is described a lot, principally in terms of how they dress and how they are to be identified. So this is the provision that imposes this new requirement that they wear some distinguishing marks because there might be confusion and mixing. We may not be able to tell people apart. And one of the dangers of this for Innocent III is that there might be sexual mixing between these different religious communities, which poses a threat and a danger to the purity of Christian society. So he imposes this. And also there's a lot of concern that sometimes Jews and Muslims during the days of Easter may wear fancy clothes, their best clothes, and not be appropriately in public respecting Christian grief. This is a time of grief, right? This is Lent, and then the Holy Week is about the crucifixion of Christ, and these non-Christians are behaving in ways that suggest that they're happy. They should not be happy, right? So it says that they should, it legislates that they should be strictly forbidden, to dare in any way to behave in that way, to mock Christians who are and displaying signs of grief, and in any way show derision to Christian rituals, right, which have this paramount and dominant position in society. And lastly, there is also, further, these kinds of, in Canon 71, about people who convert. And once they've converted, if they backslide, they pose a danger to the community. So I won't go reading it, but that question of conversion is, of course, important. So I want to conclude here by just talking about the Moriscos in Spain and the Morisco clothing ban, to say that this stable system of subordination broke down with campaigns for mass conversion of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula, particularly 1390s, and expulsion of Jews in 1492 of those who were unconverted, and then starting in the early 16th century after the 1492 conquest of the Emirate of Granada, the conversion of the Moors, the Saracens, the Muslims, creating large populations of new Christians who were suspected as crypto-Jews and as crypto-Muslims were now subject to surveillance and interrogation by the Inquisition as heretics or bad Christians. Since they've been forcibly converted, you know, there was not a lot of trust in the fact that they were actually adhering to Christianity, and that created its own problem now, which was to be solved by subjecting them to the Inquisition. As a tool of assimilation, aspects of the distinctive culture of this community, the community derogatively termed sometimes Moriscos, became targets of suppression. The banning of Arabic writings and documents, the suppression and banning of hammams, bathhouses, the zarfa music. Here's examples of the, this is the early 16th century, 1529 set of a costume book by Christoph Weidetz, a German who visited during this period, and he drew kind of pictures of traditional Moriscos and others in Spanish society. But he also included a scene of what I think might be the zarfa music, which was traditional Morisco dance and music that also was banned and had to be suppressed. Decorating the skin with henna, okay, this was also banned. And of course, the hijab, or veiling and wearing of distinctive clothing of the Moriscos. Against these measures and their forcible enactment, a leader of the Granadan Muslim community wrote a petition and a complaint attempting to justify the practices of the new Christian against unfair suppression of their language and culture. His pleas amounted to a statement of traditional Mediterranean toleration of distinctive clothing practices as part of social identity. I want to read very quickly just a passage from his complaint that deals so much with the problem of clothing throughout it. We can't get into the details. If you're interested, we can talk a little bit more about it. But he says, about these complaints that the church figures have been making against the Moriscos. He says that in their reports, the prelates, that is the church figures, contend that the preservation of the traditional style of dress and footwear of the natives of this kingdom, that is speaking of the Granadan Muslim Moriscos, is tantamount to a continuation of the ceremonies and customs of the Muslims. I can only say, my lord, that these reports are wholly without merit, because the style of dress, clothing, and footwear of the natives cannot be said to be that of Muslims, nor is it that of Muslims. It can be more rightly be said to be clothing that corresponds to a particular kingdom and province. All the kingdoms of Castile and all the other kingdoms and provinces have their own styles of dress that is different from the others, and yet they are all Christians. In like manner, the style of dress and clothing of this kingdom is very different from the clothing of the Moroccan and Barbary Muslims. And there are also great differences to be found from one kingdom to another. What they wear in Fez is not worn at all in Tlemcen, and what they wear in Turkey is wholly unlike anything worn by the Moroccans, and yet they are all Muslims. It follows that one cannot establish or state that the clothing of the new converts is that of the Muslims. This argument contained in the decree is also rendered invalid by the fact that Christians who live in the holy city of Jerusalem, and that whole kingdom is made up of Christians and men learned in the faith, have been seen in Granada wearing clothing and headdresses similar to what is worn in the Maghreb and resembling in no way what is worn in Castile, and yet they are Christians. They also have no knowledge of the Castilian language, and yet they are Catholic Christians. It follows from what I have just said that Christianity is not found in the clothing or footwear that is now in style, and the same is true of Islam. Now, I think this gentleman would have made a marvelous historian of the medieval Mediterranean, because he really understands what it means to have diversity, culturally, religiously existing, while still maintaining one's religious identity and faith, and being part of one's culture at the same time. I'll stop there because I've been going on for quite a long time, but thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Adnan. I'm just going to wait for the PowerPoint to come up. Yeah, so basically all I have to say to continue with my presentation is enter Cervantes. Adnan's really done a lot of the work for me in terms of developing the historical context. I'm going to skip over a bunch of these right away, and we will just go right to Miguel De Cervantes. As you can see, his lifeline there roughly corresponds with the increase in the intolerance and persecution of the Moriscos and their final expulsion in 1609. Cervantes is an interesting writer to work with in this sense for many reasons. He's not a member of the aristocracy. He's a member of a more or less noble family. Although his father has a somewhat dubious profession as an itinerant doctor, which places him in the neighborhood of the Jewish converso. And his father had to travel around a lot, moving away from bad debt. And so Cervantes really never as a child got settled. He wasn't formally educated. At some point he had to flee to Italy, apparently because of an honor dispute. It appears that he had either injured or killed a nobleman in a duel to protect his sister's honor, and so there's an edict for him to leave the country, which he does. He ends up in Italy, and he's a soldier there. And he is a soldier in a famous battle against the Ottoman Turks called the Battle of Lepanto. And at the same time as the Battle of Lepanto is happening, and Spain is trying to increase its Mediterranean foothold, politically and geopolitically, at home in Spain, there's a different kind of war going on, a very violent war called the War of the Pujaros. The period preceding the War of the Pujaros is one of more or less tolerance of the Moriscos in Spain. The policy of the crown is to try to convert them to Christianity. And so they're trying, in a sense, the politics of accommodation. But things are going poorly for Spain outside of Spain, and their response is in order to increase enthusiasm for the crown's foreign adventures, to create an internal scapegoat. And one of these internal scapegoats is the Morisco population. And so they start outlawing, as Adnan pointed out, their clothes, their hygiene, customs, their rituals, their language, and this is what results in the reaction of the Moriscos, who respond militarily against the oppression. And so there's a war. It goes very poorly for the Moriscos. Ultimately, they are completely defeated, and they are dispersed throughout Spain. So while Cervantes is fighting for the crown in the Mediterranean, at home there's a different kind of war going on. And of course, politically, they're linked, because even though the Moriscos politically have nothing to do with the Ottoman Empire, the crown makes this connection, right? And they use it to oppress the Moriscos in Spain. on Cervantes' way home from the war, and he availed himself very heroically, so much so that he's carrying letters from the brother of King Philip II, a letter of recommendation that Cervantes thinks is going to result in a court appointment. On his way home, his ship is attacked by Barbary corsairs, and he is captured along with his brother, and they are brought to Algiers, and they are held as hostages for 5 years in Algiers, which is a Muslim city, although it's actually a very cosmopolitan city where religion is really functions as a passport. It's kind of a frontier town, and Cervantes is there for 5 years waiting to be ransomed because his family is not wealthy. His kidnappers think he is wealthy, and so they hold out for 5 years. And so Cervantes has a very first-hand experience with Muslim culture, the Arabic language, religion, and it's going to affect him in ways that you would not anticipate. When he gets back to Spain, and maybe the reason for his turn against the empire in some sense is when he's returned to Spain, he is treated as a traitor. He is interrogated by the early modern Spanish version of the Department of Homeland Security, and he is made to feel like a traitor. He has to produce a very long, detailed text about how he didn't convert, how he wasn't sodomized by his kidnappers, how he remained a pure Christian, even though he tried to escape 4 times. And of course, while he's over there trying to escape, and his kidnappers aren't punishing him, they're punishing his partners in crime horrifically. And he carries this back with him to Spain, and we're going to see it play out in a lot of his writings. And so his literary career basically is between 1585 and 1616. He writes Don Quixote, his most famous work, in 1605, a second volume in 1616, and this is the work that we're going to look at most closely to see to look at his representation of Morisco characters. The first example comes from his first sally. Okay, remember he is not a knight. He transforms himself into a knight, from Alonso Quijano to Don Quixote. He transforms his horse from a flea-bitten nag into the famous Rocinante. Okay? And on his first sally as a knight, he doesn't really know where to go, but he has his ideals, and he confronts some travelers, and he wants them to proclaim that Dulcinea, another invention of his, is the most beautiful woman in the realm. Well, they've never seen Dulcinea. They'd like a picture. And they know that he's a little bit off. And he gets upset, and he charges at them with his horse and his lance. Unfortunately, Rocinante trips and falls, rolls over him, and the travelers jump on him and beat him to a pulp. And this first example comes from when he's laying on the ground, and a farmer comes up and finds him, and the farmer actually knows who he is. So farmer asked him how he felt and what was wrong. He answered with the same words and phrases that the captive scion of the Abencerraje family said to Rodrigo de Narvaez, just as he had read them in the history of Diana by Jorge de Montemayor. And this is what Don Quixote says. Your Grace should know, Don Rodrigo de Narvaez, that this beautiful Jarifa I have mentioned to you is now the lovely Dulcinea of Toboso, for whose sake I have performed now, and shall perform in the future the most famous feats of chivalry the world has seen, sees now, and will ever see. So in his first defeat, the person he imagines himself to be is a medieval Muslim knight named Abin Narvaez from a fictional novel called El Abencerraje. And he transforms Dulcinea de Toboso, right, his love, into Abin Narvaez's fiancée and lover, a Muslim princess from the same novel. And if you want to know what that looks like, we have to go to El Abencerraje. Okay? They saw coming towards them an elegant Moor and a roan horse. He was tall in body with a handsome face, and he rode his horse well. He was wearing crimson robes and a damask overcoat of the same color, all embroidered with gold and silver. His right sleeve was rolled up, and embroidered on it was a beautiful lady, and in his hand a hefty and beautiful lance with 2 heads. He carried a light shield and scimitar, and on his head a Tunisian turban wound around many times, which served both to defend and enhance his person. In this garb, the Moor approached, showing a genteel countenance and singing the song he composed in the sweet remembrance of his loves that said, and then there's a poem, right, written in Castilian. So this is the image that Don Quixote has in his mind of his first defeat. It's a heroic defeat of Abin Narvaez by Rodrigo de Narvaez early in the 15th century. Again, fictionalized in a novel in the middle of the 16th century. And so underneath this we have Alonso Quijano, Don Quixote, and now a Muslim warrior, right? And so we have this movement of identity and different changes of clothes, right? But Alonso Quijano is still under there somewhere.
Primero que nada, el argumento de la novela se desarrolla después de
Sorry, I don't know.
la novela morisca.
Sorry. I guess that was a recorded PowerPoint that never played on my computer until just now. So Don Quixote's identity is a performative one, right? When the farmer says, "But I know who you are. You are not Abin Narvaez, and I am not Rodrigo de Narvaez," Don Quixote yells at the man, "I know who I am, and I know who I can be. Not only those I have mentioned, but the 12 peers of France as well, and even all the 9 peregrines of fame, for my deeds will surpass those that they have performed together or singly." When we take this in comparison to how clothes and identity sort of merge or fuse in medieval culture, according to what Adnan has said, what we're seeing is a very different approach to the relationship between clothes and identity in Cervantes. It's good to keep in mind when you're reading Cervantes that this is a time of the Inquisition and persecution and censorship, right? He cannot say outright in his texts that he is critical of the intolerance towards Muslims, that he is critical of the expulsion of the Moniscos. What he can show us is a certain flexibility in the relationship between external signs and internal identity. Another example comes from later on. It's called the Captive's Tale, right? Don Quixote is at an inn, and a man arrives dressed again, like a Moor or a Morisco, with a woman on a horse that is trailing behind him. Okay? His clothing indicated that he was a Christian recently arrived from Moorish lands, for he was dressed in a short blue woolen tunic with half sleeves and no collar, breeches of blue linen, and a cap of the same color. He wore ankle boots the color of dates, and a Moorish scimitar hung from a strap across his chest. Then a woman came in after him riding on a donkey and dressed in the Moorish fashion. Her face hidden by a veil, she wore a small brocade cap and a long cloak that covered her from her shoulders to her feet. And yet what we have here is a Christian man in Moorish dress. He was a captive like Cervantes. This is like a Cervantes representing himself in Don Quixote. Okay? And the story here is he's a captive, and there's a Moorish princess, and she wants to convert to Christianity, right? Later, this will be reversed in a different scene. Okay? So she bribes him, basically courts him to marry her, right? And she gives him enough money and means and connections so that they can get a boat and escape from Algiers. Okay, because she wants to convert to Christianity, and they're going to marry. Okay, so again, we have a Muslim woman here who fashions herself a Christian. We have a man dressed as a Muslim who is a Spanish Christian. And so Cervantes is breaking the link, right, between clothes and identity. And he's giving a certain flexibility that doesn't actually exist in reality. He's creating an alternative through his fiction. Later on, he told her in Arabic that she was being asked, again, a Spaniard who speaks Arabic. Again, it's something rare, but not unheard of in early modern Spain. that she was being asked to remove her veil and that she should do so, and she lifted her veil and revealed a face so beautiful that Dorothea thought her more beautiful than Lucinda, and Lucinda thought her more beautiful than Dorothea. And everyone present realized that if any beauty could equal that of those two women, it was the Moorish ladies, and there were even some who thought her superior in certain details. And since it is the prerogative and charm of beauty to win hearts and attract affection, everyone surrendered to the desire to serve and cherish the beautiful more. And so the community here is expanded, right? The other people in the inn are Spanish noblemen and noblewomen, okay? And the woman's beauty and the man's story creates a break, right? Creates a gap that Cervantes will exploit later on. She is a Moor in her dress and body, but in her soul she is a devout Christian because she has a very strong desire to be one. Again, the essentialist link between clothing and identity is ruptured here. We'll skip this one over for time. At the end of the second volume of Don Quixote, there's another interesting episode. The episode of Ana Felix in Don Quixote. Ana Felix is a Morisca woman, a young Morisca woman. This is after the expulsion. Her father, Ricote, we meet him in a previous scene, but his father left at the expulsion to go find a place for his family in a foreign country. And he left Ana Felix with her uncles. The uncles take her, and a neighboring Spanish nobleman, not a Morisco, who fell in love with her, okay, Don Gregorio and Ana Felix are engaged. And Don Gregorio follows Ana Felix into exile, just as Zoraida, the woman from the captive's tale, follows the captive, the Spanish captive, to Spain. And so we have love overcoming religious identity and the intolerance, right? When Ana Felix gets to Algiers, she catches the eye of the king, which is a bad deal, right? But she tells the king that she has many riches buried back in Spain, which is one of those stereotypes that Moors bury their riches. And Cervantes uses this stereotype, but for other reasons. And so he tells her to go back to Spain to get the riches, but he's also heard that there's a beautiful boy that's come with them, right? And he's very intrigued by this beautiful boy. Well, Ana Felix is perturbed by this, and she tells Don Gregorio to dress as a woman, so that he's not so intriguing to the king of Algiers. And so he does, and Don Gregorio then stays in Algiers while Ana Felix is sent back with some pirates to Spain to get the treasure and bring it back to Algiers to free Gregorio, etc. And so this scene is in Barcelona when they are captured. They are captured by Spanish military. And they're going to hang Ana Felix because she's dressed as a pirate, right? They think they've captured a pirate, okay? And so the governor of Barcelona says, "Tell me, Captain, are you Turkish nationality or a Moor or a renegade?" To which the boy responded, also in the Castilian tongue, "I am not of Turkish nationality or a Moor or a renegade." "Then what are you?" replied the viceroy. "A woman and a Christian," responded the young man. "A woman and a Christian in those clothes, in these circumstances, it is more to be wondered at than believed." "Oh, señores," said the boy, "suspend my execution for a little while. Not much will be lost if you delay your revenge while I recount to you my life." And she recounts to them her life. They decide not to hang her. In fact, she becomes sort of the toast of Barcelona. And the noblemen and noblewomen of Barcelona are trying to figure out how to keep her in Barcelona while there's an edict of expulsion. And so Cervantes, once again, is challenging, right, through stories, not through arguments, not through edicts, not through critiques. He's challenging through stories the relationship between dress and identity. And I'm just going to read a few things and then I will finish. By the way, this is a picture of a female Barbary pirate from the 16th century who was born in Granada, an actual historical figure I have her name somewhere around here. I can't find it. Oh, wait. The pirate queen that dominated the Mediterranean seas, Saida al-Hira. Her real name might have been Aisha, born in Granada around 1485. So I'm just going to read a few things and conclude. Don Quixote imagines himself as a fictional Moorish knight, Abindarrais, and his lady Dulcinea as Harifa. A Christian captive dresses like a Moor. Zoraida, a Moorish lady, desires to be a Christian, going so far as to rename herself after the Virgin Mary. A young Morisco woman dresses and acts like a Barbary pirate, only to reveal herself as a Christian Morisca. Cervantes' point in all of this cross-dressing and gender-bending fiction would seem to be that all dress does have strong symbolic value and communication power, both socially and politically. It is subject to manipulation as well as misreadings. In early modern Spain, what began as a politics of tolerance and accommodation gives way to forced religious conversion, and then to intolerance in the form of linguistic, ritual, hygiene, and clothing prohibitions, and finally, total expulsion. Cervantes' response to the symbolic burden and possibilities embodied by clothing in this intolerant world is complex, and let us not forget, carried out in an environment of extreme censorship. In the first instance, taking Don Quixote as an example, Cervantes shows step by step how clothing and accessories are filled with symbolic value through rituals of purification and naming. Alonso Quijano becomes Don Quixote, a flea-bitten nag becomes Rocinante, a peasant laborer becomes his squire Sancho, and a peasant woman becomes Dulcinea del Toboso. But regardless of the care that Alonso Quijano takes in his self-transformation, the fictional nature of his chivalric identity and quest are never allowed to triumph over the mundane reality around him, no matter how convincing or violent he becomes. Perhaps more important for our purposes here, Cervantes creates new and difficult combinations of words and symbols. There is no essential relationship between the costume and the actor, between words and their meaning, between bodies and identities. These relationships are constantly redefined and recontextualized. The reader, rather than stepping onto solid ground, is set adrift in order to witness and then participate in reimagining the social and political relationships of counter-Reformation Spain. Let us not forget that the entire novel is framed as a history written originally in Arabic by the Moorish historian Sidi Ahmed Ben Enkheli, dressed up in Castilian. When I read about the desire of Zoraida and Ana Felix to be Christian, it occurs to me that the word Christian doesn't have an exclusively religious connotation here, but rather stands in for the concept of Spanish national identity. For a crusading aristocracy that defines itself as Catholicism's champion, its knight in shining armor, there can be no distance, no space between the nation and its religious creed. Religion functions as the passport to social acceptance and privilege, and institutions like the Inquisition exist to define the terms of holding this passport and examine who authentically holds it. Cervantes opens up the space, an unclosable gap between these individuals' desire and their symbolic baggage, often symbolized by their clothing. In this world, it is possible to be dressed as a Barbary pirate, or an exiled Morisco dressed as a pilgrim, or a veiled Arabic-speaking woman, and at the same time be a loyal subject and valued member of the community. Cervantes' use of the term Christian, in combination with diverse costumes and personal circumstances, reveals alternative meanings and a multifaceted understanding of what it means to be Spanish. You don't even need to speak Spanish. In the end, his use of clothing and language could not be more modern or more relevant for our own worlds. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kathleen Ridolfo, Middle East expert, more than 20 years experience covering the region's political, social, and cultural evolution. She's published extensively on the subjects of politics, the media, and civil unrest in the Middle East, and she is the executive director of Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center in Washington, D.C. Kathleen.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate your remarks, Dr. Nelson and Dr. Husain, your remarks prior to that. I'm so happy to be with you all today, and I'd really like to thank our friends at Concordia University and of course Queen's University as well for the generous invitation to speak about Oman today as Canada is marking Muslim Awareness Week. And so I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go. So I think the best starting point, of course, is to be sure that everyone taking part in the discussion today realizes where Oman is. And so I put a couple of maps up. It's, of course, in the Arabian Peninsula, also known as the Gulf, and it borders Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the UAE, and Iran. Oman is a country that has a very distinct identity, particularly in the Gulf, because it's one of the oldest inhabited places, or the oldest inhabited places in that region. And so the Omanis have always had a presence on their land, and Oman is well known for being a country of empires. The Omanis are seafarers historically, and so they traveled across the Indian Ocean and as well as to East Africa. And in the 1800s, the seat of Omani power was actually in Zanzibar. So Oman is often said to have been sailing to China while Europe was still in the Dark Ages. They have a rich culture and a rich identity. And I think, interestingly enough, this experience, this historic experience for them has really embedded in their DNA a distinct personality. And this would be that they are very open to other cultures. They're very curious about other cultures, and they're genuine about this. So Omanis want to learn about people. They want to know people and understand people. And I think they're very tolerant. So Omanis, by and large, not exclusively, but by and large, practice Ibadi Islam. Ibadi Islam is a stream of Islam that is, its foundation is based on tolerance. So the Omanis of the historically have been open to other cultures, but particularly in the modern era, more so than perhaps other states in the region. His late Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said, who ruled Oman from 1970 until his passing in 2020, was very keen on opening the country to other cultures and other religions. He built mosques, he built temples. People were welcome to pray as they saw fit, and they still do this today. And even Islam, an Omani colleague recently told me, you know, when we go to the mosque, we all pray together, whether we're Sunni or Shia or Ibadi or another sect. And so this is quite unique for the region. And so I'll be talking about a lot of details of traditional Omani dress, and I hope that what you'll draw from that in this conversation today is some insights into the identity of Omanis. And as my predecessors said, often the lines are blurred between a national identity and a cultural identity and a religious identity. And Oman is no stranger to that. It's quite the same. But I hope you'll gain some insights into Omani identity as we go along this discussion, and I look forward to questions later. So first of all, when we talk about Omani traditional dress, of course we have to take into consideration these 4 factors on the screen here, because they are the driving force behind why Omanis dress the way they do. And of course, at the top of that would be the climate. You know, this is a country with a hot and humid climate. The interior is rocky, it's mountainous, it's harsh. They have coastlines that have very high humidity. And then in Jafar, in the southern areas of Oman, where the country borders with Yemen, you have monsoon rains that pass through. And so these monsoon rains bring the temperatures down, and the temperatures can be quite pleasant in the summer. So in the north, you will find 49, as high as 49 degrees Celsius in the summer, but down in the south, it could be 20 or 25 degrees in the summer. And so clothing has a practicality to it. It has to be protective against the elements. It has to be comfortable. And so this was a driving factor for many people as they began dressing. And you'll see later on that this is a tradition that predated Islam. It predated the modern Oman, but it's still being done today. And also the environment. Of course, the country was largely undeveloped until the last quarter of the 20th century. And so when His late Majesty came to power in 1970, you had a country that had maybe 2 paved roads, no schools, no electricity, no running water. And so although Oman is a very modern country today, this is something that colleagues my age, or perhaps a generation older, they remember quite well that the country was very different in their youth. And so this, of course, had an impact on the way people dressed. And then we must, of course, think about lifestyle. Although most Omanis were settled, particularly in the interior, we did have a Bedouin or nomadic culture in many areas. And that culture tends to be more conservative than others. And of course, Islam had an impact on modesty and the way people dressed and chose to follow fashion. Now, one thing I really need to point out when I discuss Oman is that Omani identity is very much wrapped up in the things like clothing and dress and comportment. And so what you find here is, this is a graphic that was published in the 2 different newspapers in 2015 in Oman, and each graphic explains the components of national attire. So we tend to think like, okay, a man wears typically a white dishasha, but actually there are several components to the way a man dresses and to the way a woman dresses. For women, it's quite regional, and I'll talk about that a little bit farther on with other slides. But the main point that you should gather from this is that national dress is a source of tremendous pride for the Omani people, and so they want to uphold these traditions in their culture. And so when we talk about Omani women's clothing, which is typically called Omaniya style, we have 4 basic parts. We have a dishdasha, which is a dress, a sarwal, which is the trouser, wakaya, which is a head cover that is wrapped around the head, and then we have the lahaf, which is a head cover that gets draped over the head. And, you know, the female form of the dishdasha is something that normally would extend to the knee, but sometimes it's even longer. And the neckline goes along the base of the neck, with loose sleeves hanging down to the wrist and a front opening with an overlap or a button at the top. The dishdasha, of course, is very modest, and traditionally it's made from very colorful prints. You don't find people dressing in dull colors in the Sultanate, which is lovely. Typically, it's made of cotton or silk cotton blend. And the extent to which the embellishment on a dishdasha, or the extent to which a dishdasha is embellished, really depends upon what that garment was made for. So, for example, if it's an everyday wear, something to wear around the house, you'll see very little embellishment, maybe a little bit on top or a little bit along the cuff of the sleeve, or no embellishment at all. When you get to what we see here on the left in the photo on the screen, then you see more, for more formal attire or dress, you'll see heavy embellishment. So particularly around the ankles, but also in the front, on the chest of the dress. The sarwal, this is the pants that the women wear under their dishasha. They're trousers that are quite forgiving. They're loose fitting around the hips and usually much tighter along the ankle. There's no option to not wear this under the dishasha. This is something, even if the dishasha is very long, they must be worn underneath. So that's something to keep in mind. And the reason behind this is women traditionally had roles that were heavily involved in the home. They often sat on the floor. They were outside doing labor. They were gathering wood for the fire. They were herding the sheep. They were feeding the animals, doing things around the house. And so there was a practicality to it as well. Like the dishasha, the sarwal is also normally constructed using printed cottons and occasionally silk cotton blends. And of course, the embellishment is the most special part. And typically it's on the ankle, but sometimes it goes a little bit further up, just to below the knee. The wakaya is a head cover that wraps around the head. And it's usually about 150 centimeters long and half as wide. And it's made from a very light cloth that can be used, it's a lighter cloth than we would use for the dishasha or for the sarwal. It could be embroidered, it could be a solid color, but you never find it as a print. And there's a special feature that makes a piece of cloth a wakaya, and that is the fringe you see in the photo on the left and also on the right. And that fringe is typically about 12 centimeters long, and it's usually, of course, made from a wool in different colors. Sometimes it's one color, sometimes it's a variety of colors. The lahaf. The lahaf is a very popular term for the headscarf that's worn today. It's the outer headscarf that is not tightly wrapped, and it's without fringe. Typically, it's draped over the head. It hangs down on both sides of the face and across the back. It's usually not worn inside the house. It's something that you would put on if you were going outside and leaving the home. If it's an Omani woman who has a connection to Zanzibar, then you'll see her wearing a kanga as a lahaf. A kanga, for those who don't know, is a piece of cloth worn by women and occasionally men in the African Great Lakes region, and it's made of cotton. It's about 1.5 meters by 1 meter, and often has a border along all four sides, and then in the middle you see a different, more distinctive print. Women have accessories that they wear. These are quite old and traditional styles that are very unique to Oman. And of course, they'll wear bangles. Traditionally, always they wore silver. Today, you often find women wearing the same designs in gold. Necklaces and ornamentations that go on the forehead are usually reserved for a special occasion like a wedding or a festival. And it's a must for all women to wear some kind of adornment. And then we have a face covering. So in Oman, we refer to the face covering that you see on the screen as a burqa. This is something that predates Islam. So contrary to Western perceptions, it's not related to Islam. It's more related to protecting from the elements and providing a measure of modesty. And we have to remember that women were home alone a lot and also wanted to give themselves some form of protection. And so this is something that came into use and is still used in some areas today, particularly by older women in the Sultanate. And this, by the way, this is made from like a harder material, and it usually covers just these parts of the face. And the one on the left, it looks to me like it's probably made from indigo cloth, which is something very, very unique to Oman and very scarce in these modern times. So I have a video that I'd like to share. It's only about 1.5 minutes long, but I think it really illustrates the way that women in Oman particularly perceive the face mask. And so this is a video that you can find online. It's on YouTube, it's on the internet. And it's a series by a Western journalist called Abroad. And she is in Oman interviewing people about what their life is like. And she has a session with an Omani Bedouin woman. So please just bear with me and we'll play this.
In Oman, a burqa refers to the traditional face mask of the Bedouin women and must be worn at all times outside of the home. Have you always worn the mask? I know it's about shame and you can't show your face, but how did it start? So before Muhammad?
Of course before.
So they wore it before Islam?
Exactly.
Santa then offered me a burqa. Oh, on top, I see. I feel like there's going to be a camel exchange in a minute. You just have one little piece and it's fine. You just can't see the whole face.
That's right, yeah.
When do girls start wearing these?
When they start with the marriage.
I would totally do it. It's a Bedouin nose job. And so much less expensive, I'm sure. But I wasn't done yet. I was about to go full Bedouin. Despite the ultra-conservatism in the community, the Bedouins aren't judgmental of how others dress. What do you think of like Western women and how they dress?
They have their own culture. Yeah, and they are our guests, you know. We say welcome to those guests, you know.
I think this is a really good point because it illustrates the attitude that you find across the region. And I've been traveling and living in the region and going back and forth and in fact married into the region. Which is that people have their culture, they have their identity, they have their dress, and they respect others who have a different culture and a different dress and a different identity. And so this is, it's very, not very unique to Oman, but it's very exemplary of Arab culture and Middle Eastern culture in general. So I think that's important for people to keep in mind, because often here in the West, we think because someone looks different from us or dresses different from us or practices religion different from us, that it's a threat or it must be bad. And when in fact it's something that, of course, for them is quite normal and is deep rooted in their society and in their culture and in their history. I'll just move on because I don't want to take up too much time. And I want to go quickly through men's official dress, because this is something that you will see if you were to visit Oman, is something that is completely the norm. So for example, if you are in Oman, very rarely will you see an Omani man dressed as a Westerner or wearing pants or jeans or what have you, because the Omani official dress for men is the dishasha, and they take great pride in it. And in fact, the government regulates what the dishasha should look like, how long it should be, what color it should be, how it should be embroidered. And the government is quite strict on this. And they have issued reminders over the years. Every few years, you see a reminder going out to remind people that they should dress according to the style and the guidelines set by the government. I've even heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that even there are regulations in the marketplace as to what kind of dishashas can be sold. So as I'm talking about dishasha, of course this is the main white, generally white, but also can be other colors, gown worn by men. In addition, they have a masar that they wear, which is a head wrap, a long scarf that is wrapped around the head, and a kuma, which is a cap, which you see in the lower picture. And often, particularly for formal wear, men will wear a kuma and wrap their masar around it. Of course, the dishasha, and then a wizar, which is a hip cloth that is wrapped around the waist, and it goes underneath the dishasha. And on top, under the dishasha, of course, they wear a t-shirt. And I just want to show you some accessories for men, because I think it's important, and particularly as a marker for identity for Omani men. So Omani men always have a dagger, which is called a khanjar. And the khanjar is ceremonial, but it's a major source of identity for all Omani men. Once you come of age, you will have a khanjar, and you will take pride in it, and you will wear it for formal occasions. Even if you're a government employee, you have a formal occasion or a formal meeting, you will wear that khanjar. They also traditionally carry a cane, which is called an asa. And the asa is like a long embellished stick, which is nowadays only carried for formal occasions like weddings and cultural gatherings. But in the past, it had very practical purposes. So men could use them to herd their camels or their sheep. They could use it to protect themselves from venomous insects and snakes. They can use a stick as a gesture with their hands, tapping it on the ground. They use it in dance, traditional dance, and it's a very important part of their identity. It's typically made of bamboo, but also commonly used or commonly embellished with bone and sometimes precious stones or silver. And here on the far right, you see a kuma, and then masar next to it. And here are some other photos. Before I go, there's something that I really need to talk about, because it's so much a part of Omani everyday life, and that's the role of frankincense in life in Oman. Frankincense, as you probably know, is from the Boswellia sacra tree. It's grown in the south of Oman, and it's a resin. You actually scrape the tree, you cut the tree, and you let the sap ooze out. And typically, maybe 7 to 10 days later, you would go and scrape the resin that has seeped out and it's hardened. And then that resin gets burned on top of charcoal, and it creates this wonderful aroma. Of course, many people in the West know frankincense because frankincense was carried by the wise men who visited the baby Jesus at his birth, and of course they came from the land of Magan, which is the original word for Oman. And so it's a resin that was highly valued, more valuable than gold in some places in the ancient world. It was traded heavily all the way from China to Europe, and Oman made its fortunes largely on frankincense. But for our discussion today, it's interesting to point out how Omanis use frankincense in their homes and in their clothes. And so what you see on the right is a type of bamboo tent in which the frankincense burner is placed underneath, and then the clothes are placed on top. And everyone in Oman, I would say almost everyone in Oman, they perfume their clothes with frankincense. And so when you are just standing among colleagues, you can smell the frankincense on their clothing. And it's a way to act as a natural deodorant. It also gives, this impression of cleanliness and order. But it's very much a part of their traditions. Of course, also frankincense is something that's burned widely across the Sultanate every day. So in people's homes, in businesses, when you go to a government ministry, usually you can smell frankincense as soon as you walk in the door. So it's really a part of their whole identity, and it's so important to everyday life. They also have modern uses for it. They're studying it right now at Sultan Qaboos University because it seems to show some cancer-fighting properties. Historically, frankincense was used to heal a toothache, to make a tea from, to heal an ailment. Today you can find frankincense-flavored ice cream when you go to Oman. So it's something that is again, just really part and parcel of life. And so I'll end there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions when we get to that point. Thank you.
So I know we're officially out of time, but I still would like to take a few minutes if there are questions. If you have a question, please move to the microphone so that everybody can hear you. And I'm not sure if someone's watching the chat to see if there are. Yeah. Oh, okay. I guess it'll be that. No takers?
It wouldn't be possible not to ask this question. I just want to thank Professors Husain, Ridolfo, and Nelson for their talks, which are extremely interesting, and really impetus is to read much more on these topics. But my question is, what is in each of your respective fields the tension or the balance of head covering as a marker of a religious identity versus head covering as a marker of a cultural identity? I view head covering as complex, and I'm wearing a toque, and I view it as complex and cultural, as well as possibly religious, but I'd like to hear from Cervantes, from the history of Muslim culture and national identity, and also in Oman. To what extent is head covering cultural versus a signifier of religious identity? And to what extent is it mixed and complex?
Kathleen, do you want to take the first shot at this question?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I feel like the decision to veil or cover one's head, it's a very personal decision. And I know that, typically, and this is a cultural thing as well, if you decide as a woman to veil, there's really no going back. You don't later just say, okay, I'm not going to veil anymore. So it's a very private decision, but it's also a very serious decision. In Oman, it's also cultural because it's tradition. Women veil. You don't find women very often who are Muslim and not veiling, and that's a trend that's different in other countries in the region. So, for example, in other countries, particularly like what we call the Shami countries, so you would find Syria, Iraq, maybe even in Palestine at times, in the modern era, you have more cultural pressures to veil than you would necessarily feel that it's an obligation of your religion. It also depends on how religious the person is, of course. So it's very hard to separate the idea of culture and religion and say one thing is exclusive, veiling is exclusively cultural in this context and exclusively religious in that context. You really can't, because identity is so intertwined with religion in the region. So I know that's not really answering your question, but I think it's probably my best response to this. And for me personally, you know, I don't mind saying I was raised Catholic. My Catholic grandmother wore a head covering to church. And so for me, when I look at the idea of veiling, it's not something that I see in political terms or cultural war terms. It's something like very normal that I experienced in my own life, and I'm not of Muslim heritage or Arab heritage. I'm Italian. You can see by my name, and Irish by descent. But it's something very normal to me. So I think a lot of times it depends also on perspective.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think the first thing to be said about it is just that, you know, one should ask people who do wear head coverings what it means to them. And, you know, in particular, there's always a lot of interest in, you know, Muslim women's head coverings. And very oftentimes it's talked about and discussed without, you know, ever asking Muslim women who wear the head cover what it means to them. Do they find that it's cultural identification with their community? It's a traditional practice that they have, or does it spiritually communicate something to them? How does it make them feel? I think these are all really interesting questions, and then we would get a range. I think we would get very different, you know, perspectives from others, from Muslim women who feel about it in different ways. But I was going to make the same sort of point that it's pretty common actually across lots of cultures, and it also the veil that was mentioned, that the Omani burqa, pre-existing, you know, the coming of Islam, that is also the case for head covering. It was a common practice in urban Near Eastern societies. It was a way of marking, you know, who's a married woman, basically. And in fact, actually, there were, you know, who is a sort of free woman, right? You know, there we have from like the time of Hammurabi that there were petitions by, you know, enslaved women, you know, petitioning to be able to wear head covering because they wanted to wear. And, you know, so there's a variety of different meanings it can have in different historical contexts. And I think the real issue here is that others seem so invested in, you know, trying to define the meaning for others and decide, you know, what should it mean, what does it mean. And so you have people enforcing it, that it must be worn. You have people saying it must not be worn. And in either of these cases, we're going about it entirely the wrong way. Let's ask women what they want to do, what it means to them, and I think that's the approach to take. And so we have somebody who would like to talk about it, who's...
Yes, I'd like to enlighten you that it's not just married women who cover their heads. Anyone can cover their head if they want to.
I'm saying historically in the ancient Near East.
I see.
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's your own spirituality. I think it's your own belief. It's neither cultural nor religious. It's how you feel. It's a mark of respect, and that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will say a few words about Cervantes and Counter-Reformation Spain to this point, or this question. Baroque Spain is a very theatrical culture. It's about ostentation, at least where the aristocracy is concerned. And the aristocracy is who is making the rules and enforcing them and pushing the Inquisition in this direction or the other direction. And it's all about exclusion, about who belongs to the aristocracy, right? Oddly enough, the great narrative works of Spanish fiction are all about anti-heroes, characters who challenge the aristocracy by coming from humble origins and dressing like aristocrats trying to move up in society. Some of these works are designed to punish this gesture, such as the picaresque novel, and some of these works are designed to point out how arbitrary the rules are concerning who gets in and who gets out, who gets to wear what and who doesn't get to wear it. And the laws in Spain, they call them the sumptuary laws. A lot of them are so that the aristocracy itself doesn't spend itself into incredible debt, right? Because they're competing for favors at the court, and they compete by being more ostentatious, right? And so it's partly about who you are, and this is where the Inquisition comes in, as Professor Husain has pointed out, trying to figure out who's a real Christian versus a crypto Jew or a crypto Muslim. But more often than not, it's just how to keep up-and-coming individuals, up-and-coming merchants, subjects, people coming from the colonies who've made a lot of money, who come from humble origins, how to keep them out of the aristocracy, right? And so, in that sense, it's very relevant to contemporary laws that try to keep people out or discourage them from wearing certain dress or certain symbols, right? Or certain kinds of clothing, right? And so, again, this is why I continue to teach Cervantes and why I think we should continue to read Cervantes. Are there more questions? I think I'd like to turn it over to Lena for the raffle, well, the first raffle anyway. But I'd like to thank our speakers once again for a great discussion, and thank you for your questions as well. So.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you everyone. Thank you to the professors for those really interesting presentations. That was very, very interesting. We're gonna head over, we're gonna do the raffle now. So we're gonna go take a little.
And don't forget, if you want a t-shirt like this, it's sitting out there for you. Feel free.
While we're doing the raffle, Kathleen, do you want to tell us what first prize? There are two raffles. And the first raffle is a gift provided by the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center.
Because it didn't arrive in time with, I'll blame the US mail system, I'm sorry. We have a wonderful, what we would call a coffee table book, perhaps. Illustrated book of Oman from the sky, wonderful photos of the Sultanate, and as I said early in my presentation, if you ever get the chance to visit, it's such a wonderful place because you can scuba dive in the morning and go mountain hiking. in the afternoon and camp in the desert at night. It's just so diverse ecologically. So I hope that whoever wins this enjoys it and gets a taste of Oman.
The way that we will, so the way that we'll proceed is that, Kathleen, I'm going to ask you to pick a number between 482 and 500, and that's going to be one of the numbers that were picked out by somebody here, and that's going to be the number that's going to be a winner. And I will just ask you to give me your address, and we will ship it to you. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to mail it. So Kathleen, what is the lucky number?
So I will pick 497.
Yeah, another one, yeah.
Okay, let's pick another one.
Another number?
Yeah, between 482 and 500.
488.
Hey! Wow. It's fixed. So. Nice sense, Cobra.
And we also have a consolation prize for you. It's a book called Accept, Value, and Empower Yourself. And that's just waiting for the real prize to arrive. Yeah. So I'll come by, hand this gift, and I will take your address, and then we'll make sure that you'll get the real prize once it's here.
Okay. So there's no second round.
Ah, well, there you go. Anyway, I'd like to thank our technician, Josh, and Hospitality Concordia. Again, Samaya Biati for her really boundless energy in getting this event off the ground. Our speakers, Professor Husain and Kathleen Ridolfo, and all of you for attending. Also, sorry, Brian Bronfman and Jennifer Macaron, she's not here, and Lena, I sound like I'm at the Oscars all of a sudden, but is there anyone in the room I've missed yet? But anyway, thank you all, and have a good evening.